On a night full of the gentle pitter-patter of rain, Theo was again lying on his bed, motionless like a cadaver, kept alive by the sounds of alternative rock flowing through his ears. His hands put behind his head, his expression full of sternness, smug smirk etched on his face. As he breathed in, his chest gradually began to tighten, and his breaths became more shallow. But Theo thought nothing of it.
This was my life.
He thought. Theo was used to this kind of event. Maybe it was the weight of the world on his shoulders finally reaching his chest, pressing down on his lungs. By this point, even breathing became a chore for Theo. His heart didn't feel interest in anything. Anything but respite and alternative rock, I guess. But deep down he knew that the former would never be achieved, so he uses the latter to fill the void that he felt inside. Theo drowns himself in music all day and all night to try and feel something. That night, he felt the lowest he's ever felt. With the whole world against him, and no one on his side. Theo looked on, or guess listened on, with apathy and indifference. He drifted off to sleep, 1:45 that night, feeling short on breath. As normal Theo thought the feeling of shortness of breath was, he did not take it seriously. This was just a taste for what was to come shortly after. It would mark the start of an episode of panic and petrification in Theo's life. Theo woke up just over an hour after he fell asleep, just after 1 in the morning. He was gasping for breath, as if someone held a pillow up his face and pressed it on forcefully. Each breath he took was exhausting. He felt strangled, more than he already felt. He knew he kept telling people he was feeling suffocated in his own skin, but that wasn't literally. Now, there he was, lying in bed, actually breathless, gasping for air. He jumped out of bed, headed straight for his bathroom. He looked himself in the eye on the mirror, and he saw a dashing young lad, rather disheveled and exhausted, panting and gasping for air. He turned the tap on and cupped a handful of water and splashed it on his face. Yet a few rounds of that proved ineffective as he was still panting. He quickly cupped handfuls of water and chugged it down, thinking he was just dehydrated, yet it bore the same fate. Now, Theo was already beginning to feel worried. His expression barely changed from the outside, but the slight widening of his eyes and a much more defined frown showed a face of concern. Theo took off his hoodie in a panic and tried to breathe in and out slower than normal. Yet, for the third time in a row, his efforts were left showing no result. Then he felt an intense jitter down his spine, followed by a pounding in his head. The lack of oxygen was finally beginning to settle. With nothing else to do, Theo marched back to his bed, threw himself on his covers, and lied down flat on his bed, his arms and legs spread out. Theo felt fear for his life, even if he said he's not lasting any longer on Earth, like his statements of his suffocation were not meant to be taken literally. Deep down inside, he knew he still had so much to live for, and he was not ready to give up and face his demise just yet. He was filled with worry and anticipation for what would come next, but for now, he couldn't do anything about how he felt. He lied down in bed, panting, gasping for air, his chest puffing up as every single corner of his lungs he desperately filled with air, his sighs the heaviest they've ever been as he forces out all the air he shoved in his lungs moments before. Theo bent his arm and put one hand on his chest, feeling his heart pounding. His anxiety tripled as he feared what would come next, but then he blacked out. As Theo opened his eyes, tired and full of gown, the sunlight carefully grazed his eyes, waking up his soul. He remains curious as to what had taken place the night before, groans and grinds his teeth, then asks,
What happened?
Then he turns to his left, only to find his queer best friend, Mackie, by his bedside. Mackie was someone he knew ever since his early years, their platonic friendship highlighted by the frequent nights the two spent together. the amount of time they spend on calls, and the warmth they both feel in each other's presence. His soul is momentarily put at ease at the sight of her with a warm smile etched on her face. "Morning, buddy. How are you holding up?" she kindly asks. Despite being in shambles from the previous night, Theo mustered up all the energy he could to barely raise his voice and asked, "Mackie, what are you doing here?" Mackie seemed to have appeared out of nowhere, and as easy as he felt, there was a sense of alarm that tickled his senses. Yet, despite his alarm, Mackie's warmth persevered. "Just thought I'd pay you a visit, to keep you company," she answered. Theo, still puzzled about his conditions, bluntly asked, "Well, what happened?" She put one hand on his shoulder and told him, "Well, this is how I found you, so I assume it was hot last night?" she answered, noting how he was bottom dressed. Theo knew this wasn't the case, groaned, and told her, No, that wasn't what happened." Then, he vividly recalled the previous night's events. He was suffocating, gasping for air. His heart was pounding out of his chest. He was in a state of panic. He tried everything to alleviate his discomfort. Then, he told her everything. "It was dreadful. I couldn't breathe. I was gasping for air last night. It was terrible." He panicked. As he began to pant once again, Mackie pat him on the back and told him, "You're fine now, Theo. At least you're up and running again." He answered with a much more audible and relieved tone, "Yeah, you're right." Sensing that everything was back to normal, Theo felt that he could return to what he'd normally do. Comically, he took his headphones, put them back on his ears, and rested his hands behind his head once again. Mackie sat there confused, trying to figure out what he was doing. As she sat there curiously, Theo looked at her with a rather stern expression and told her, "Oh, Mac, if you got somewhere to go ahead. I'm fine now." She took this with dismay, rather, sensing that he was uninterested. Yet she knew this wasn't true, and Theo was just being his normal, hostile self. Rather than leaving, she got on his bed and wrapped her arms around him. Theo sensed her skin rubbing against his own bare and quickly got up to check. "What are you doing?" he faintly inquired. "I'm glad you're all right," she said, holding Theo closer. His cold and stoic demeanor quickly melted away as he wrapped his arm around her shoulder. "Yep, guess you can see that," he said with a small smile etched on his face. The air fills with a quiet sense of intimacy as the delicate moment unfolds. Theo's racing heart calmed down in the presence of his confidant, Mackie, her embrace something he always found soothing in times of distress and disorder. He lay there, every breath he takes in, not requiring any effort, something that had heavily contrasted with last night's events. As he breathes out a sigh of relief with his best friend under his wing, he turns his weary head towards Mackie's, presses a kiss on her temple, and drifts off to sleep once more.